Welcome back. It is a Tuesday, time for our weekly feature, Eye on Africa. Now, Britain says it supports land expropriation in South Africa as long as it's legal and transparent. Prime Minister Theresa May endorsed South Africa's current drive to address unequal access to land during a one-day working visit to this country. Her tone is in contrast to that of US President Donald Trump, who earlier called for an investigation and quoted Fox News that incorrectly said that land had already been seized. May is on her first visit to Africa as Prime Minister. She is the first British leader to visit sub-Saharan Africa since 2013. To discuss this and other continental issues, we're joined by Associate Editor at the Daily Maverick on the line, Brooks Spector. Brooks, thank you for being with us. Is this a great irony, Britain supporting what some would say is extreme land reform in South Africa?
Sorry, say that. I got a little muddled there for a second. Do you mind repeating that?
No problem. Brooks, I said, is this an irony that Britain is supporting a land drive that may end in expropriation without compensation?
I don't know whether it's an irony, but it certainly is a fascinating contrast to the way in which Donald Trump conducted his discussion of this. I mean, if watching it this afternoon with Theresa May and Cyril Ramaphosa, they seem to get on quite well. She came across very clearly saying, if you conduct it in accordance with law and with the Constitution and procedures are all correct, then you have to deal with things the way you have to deal with them. And he says, yes, ma'am, that's exactly how we're going to do it. And it looks like they pre-scripted the thing. And I guess there is an irony in all of this, because she's in the fight of her political life, trying to get to the end of the Brexit negotiations. Even as her party is split on it, even as her opposition, the Labour Party isn't in this corner, and there's the possibility they'll end up with a Brexit from the European Union without an agreement on the things that they're supposed to do. But by contrast, coming here, going to Kenya and Nigeria with a whole plane load of potential investors and business people, she looks rather statesmanlike.
Yeah, and her measured response, the way she spoke, do you think that shows up Trump?
Well, I mean, you know, to say anything about Donald Trump's message to Africa and attempt to put it in a positive, adult-like framework is a fool's errand. If you reach back across the last year and a half, 2 years, there's been virtually nothing positive said about Africa in countries, real or imaginary, for that matter. There's been virtually nothing that his administration has initiated or engaged with, either severally or singly or collectively, with the continent. And the mind boggles at the possibility of Donald Trump being on Air Force One with a plane load of business people and potential investors coming to Africa and making any kind of presentation the way Theresa May did, or the way Donald Trump's predecessor did. Of course, that would be rubbing salt in his wounds too, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but unfortunately, Brooks, there is concern about what he said about Africa, about his recent tweet about South Africa, because it does have economic ramifications. So I think we've spoken before. The U.S. law AGOA gives us preferential access to U.S. markets, with the whole chicken fight that was hanging in the balance. Is our participation in AGOA something that's been very beneficial for South Africa, for car makers? Is it hanging by a thread at the moment?
No. In short, no. There are two things to remember here. One, the tweet about South Africa's, the last readout of white farmers being driven to the wall and being killed as we speak, and the lands being seized, and the crops burning, and children crying, and all the rest of that. That wasn't directed at South Africa. That was directed to his base of support in the U.S. as part of that larger narrative that the white man is in trouble in the world, that they're crawling across the border in the United States from other places. They're trying to take over. If you're Mexican, you're a rapist and a murderer. boy, but it wasn't aimed particularly at South Africa. It was aimed to whip up the troops in the U.S. to rally to him, especially when he was under a certain degree of attack because two of his close associates, one had pled guilty and the other one had been sentenced to be guilty for various crimes and misdemeanors as a larger part of that ongoing investigation, the so-called Russia investigation with the special prosecutor. But the other half of it is, and yes, you're right, we have talked about AGOA in the past, and we've probably confounded any number of people on this thing, because everybody here seems to think somehow it's a treaty, and it's not a treaty. It's U.S. law. It runs until, in this case, till 2025, and it, just as you says, it grants unilateral tariff-free entrance for South African and obviously other African products from other countries, duty-free access, and depending on whose numbers you read, there's something like 75,000 local jobs that benefit from this, and I've seen numbers that run between $1.5 billion and $2 billion worth of goods that gain much easier access to the United States on any given year. Now, there's a little nub of a question there because one of the provisions within the law speaks to AGOA access is granted to countries that protect the rights to property. But that does not speak directly to expropriation of land or eminent domain of land. It speaks to the larger question of property rights. Now, it is also true, and I think you're probably itching to say this, that to wave the phrase expropriation without compensation around, even if it's carried out under law, under the Constitution, in accordance with all kinds of procedures, for some people that may sound like a red flag toward potential investors, waving them away from thinking about it, or even for some worrying that it might mean that factories and businesses might be expropriated as well. Since there's no evidence that so far that that's what it speaks to, I think that's a false fear. The question of land, and I think Cyril Ramaphosa was very good on this today. I think they really took that question in hand and said, we're doing this to enhance social and political equity. We're doing this in accordance with law and custom once we figure out exactly what we're going to do, and it is going to continue to ensure food security and economic stability. It's not quite the same as saying property rights are guaranteed for all, in all ways, for forever, but it's you'd have a hard argument to make that uniquely means that South Africa must be driven out of AGOA.
Yeah. So Brooks, what I'm going to cling to right now is that you're saying we're firmly in AGOA for now. The tweet could be seen as blustering. I wish we could continue, but I have to talk to you about what's been happening in America as well. So Senator John McCain dies, the flag going up and down on the White House pole. Has this been one of the PR disasters among many for the White House?
Well, it's the latest one, for sure. I mean, Donald Trump has this small-mindedness about him sometimes. He's had a snit fight going with John McCain for quite a while, certainly before he was even elected president. But this was just the most extraordinary unforced error. Custom for decades has been that when a senior senator who was in office for, in this case, almost 4 decades, when they passed away, you lower the flag, you keep it down for a week until the funeral and the memorial services have passed and all of the eulogies have been read and all of the weeping has been finished. Instead, what the Trump White House did was they took it down for the day and then they ran it right back up to the top of the flagpole the next day, and it was only after people moaned and groaned and complained and pointed fingers and made rude noises that they finally sort of churlishly pulled it back down to half-mast where it should have been in the first place. Now, Trump is not going to speak at the funeral. He's not invited to the funeral. He's not invited to the memorial services. He's probably saying, well, I wouldn't have gone anyway. But it's quite clear, as one columnist, usually fairly reliable conservative columnist, Jennifer Rubin, wrote in today's paper, Donald Trump is simply too small to be president.
Well, Brooks, we're running out of time, but very quickly, some are actually saying John McCain opened the door for Donald Trump by choosing Sarah Palin as a running mate. Very quickly, is that going too far?
Well, it's going pretty far, but there's a lot of truth in there, and he's admitted, or while he was still alive, obviously, he had admitted that of all the things he did in his career, that was one of his bigger mistakes, picking somebody who was just fundamentally unqualified, emotionally as well as experientially, to be a vice president. And she did, in fact, open the door to all of these rampant, wild fantasies in that corner. And you could argue that it made the rise of somebody like Donald Trump almost inevitable. Yeah, maybe so.
All right, let's leave it there. Thank you very much. Brooks Spector from the Daily Maverick for our special Tuesday feature, Eye on Africa.